Today on the Andy Draper Show, we are interviewing Brad Fay of Southern Oregon Public Television.
Who knew that 7 years ago when we started this that we would now be well over 60 students have been showcased, as it were, on our air.
Southern Oregon Public Broadcasting first started transmitting in Medford, Oregon, January 17, 1977. It is the local affiliate for the Public Broadcasting Service, known for its contribution of kids programming such as Sesame Street, Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood, and Clifford the Big Red Dog. Their programs Nova, American Experience, Nature, and Frontline cover science, history, and news, making PBS much more diverse than most other stations that can be found. Southern Oregon Public Television has local programming with programs such as Immense Possibilities, Student Showcase, and Jeffersonian. Today we talk with Brad Fay, Director of Content and Services, responsible for overseeing what gets aired on the station. Welcome to the show, Brad.
Good to be here, Andy.
Brad, I have a question about how long you've been in this business and what kept you here.
Well, I've always had a love for public television ever since college. It's a funny story. I was probably a typical college student when I didn't know what I wanted to do. And I never declared a major until very late in my college career. And when I look back on it now, I love so many subjects, I couldn't decide which one. I loved science, I loved performance, I loved all these things. What happened was, so I eventually got involved in the public television station, a brand new public television station that just opened up on our campus, and they offered me a job, a work-study job, and that's where I fell in love with public television, because if you think about it, all of those subjects are sort of covered, and so I sort of had all my fascinations fulfilled through public television, and I decided, I was inspired by a couple of people who were good mentors there, and I decided I'd probably make a career of it, and here I am 40 years later to tell you that I have.
Okay, and what got you to Oregon? Because I see you've been a few other places before you came here, so what brought you into Oregon and the public television here?
Well, that's sort of a long story too. As I mentioned, I started in college, which was in Western Michigan. From there I moved to New Hampshire, where I didn't work in public television, but I had a morning radio show, but that only lasted a year. Then I moved to California, and I started volunteering because I wanted to get back into public television at KQED, the big public television station in San Francisco. And I volunteered there for a year, and I finally landed a job, and I ended up staying there for 10 years. Then I went into commercial television for 4 years because I wanted to move into Northern California, and the public television station, frankly, wasn't in good shape, and they weren't hiring. So I moved to a commercial station in Chico, California. Then I finally landed a job at the public station in Redding, California, and I ended up staying there for 12 years. And the thing is I liked the station, I liked Redding, but it was pretty hot. And I don't go well with heat. So between 12 years in Redding with heat and 4 years in Chico with heat, I'd had it, and I got offered a job up here at KSYS, Southern Oregon Public Television, that was essentially the same thing I was doing in Redding for a little more money, but more importantly, I was out of the heat, and so I moved up here 8 years ago.
Okay, is there a big difference between public television and commercial?
There is. There's quite a bit of difference, and if you go back to the days of the early public television, well, in fact, let's go back to the very early days. In the very start, they weren't called public television, it was called educational television, and the federal government had set aside a certain amount of frequencies for universities and institutions of learning to have a television station and to simply broadcast classroom material. And so if you go back as far as I do, I actually remember as a kid being served by a public station out of Lansing, Michigan that had strictly educational television. Well, in the middle of the 1960s, the Johnson administration decided, and I might add that Bill Moyers, who's still on public television today, who was Johnson's press secretary, decided that it was time to have these stations come together and share programming, not just have educational classroom programming in each of these cities, but to actually develop programming that was different than what you saw on commercial television. So the mandate from the beginning was to be different, to your question. And so stations started to get together, they started to put money together to create programming. And for the most part, for the last, I don't know what you'd say, 50 years of the Public Broadcasting Act, these stations have all come up with programming that's different. Now, some could argue that some of the stuff that we see now on public television is available on either commercial television or even on cable. But I would even argue that if you really put them side by side, they're still quite different. Our Great Performances programming is of pretty much fine art. Our journalism is pretty much public affairs that you don't hear on the evening news. Even some of our how-tos, like This Old House and so forth, have a different twist than you might find on the do-it-yourself network. So we strive to, in public television, give the public something that they don't see elsewhere, and most importantly, would never get the ratings to support it. What you see on commercial television is supported by commercials.
Okay, in our community, there's a lot of diversity there.
Yes.
So how do you decide the content? How do you know what is going to be good for the community?
Excellent question. If you watch our station night after night, most of the content that's on there is dictated by PBS and, more importantly, by Oregon Public Broadcasting in Portland, because they do the bulk of the programming for us. It's just cheaper. We save the viewer money, as it were, our members money, by outsourcing the programming, because the programming is pretty much the same, 90% of it, night after night. Masterpiece Theater, Downton Abbey, that's seen on all of the public stations nationwide. There's no reason for me to individually program that. But to your point, about 10 or 15% of our programming is chosen locally, and a lot of it by me, but we actually have a committee that meets once a month that sort of talks through the schedule, looks for good holes in the schedule that the national schedule isn't covering, and say, well, let's re-air one of our local programs. Oh, hey, we've got a local program we're producing coming right up, we'll put it here. So if you really look at our schedule, you'll find 10 or 15% of the schedule is decided locally. And it's not just stuff we produce, because to be honest, we produce very little. But what we do is find independent producers out there who are producing things locally. And we're very proud of the fact that we have helped Curry to develop our independent producers locally so that they could produce things and get a wide audience through public television.
Okay, you do a lot of local shows on SOPTV. Can you tell me a little bit about some of those?
Sure. We really have 3 franchises that we're proud of, and I'll just go through them for a minute here. We have Southern Oregon Town Hall, and that's not on regularly, but if there's an issue and we find funding, we will produce a town hall. So we have produced town halls dealing with the timber money. We've produced town halls dealing with environment. We've town halls dealing with education. We had a town hall where we had the county supervisors debate each other. So anytime there's a town hall forum and we can find the funding for it, we do that. So we do 1 or 2 of those a year. Okay. Another franchise which we're very proud of that's now in its 7th year is Student Showcase. Okay. And Student Showcase is funded by local people like Jesse Unruh Fund or Peter Sage or any number of local foundations that put students on the air with their talent. And they're little 2-minute shorts that you'll see them in between our shows, but who knew that 7 years ago when we started this that we would now be well over 60 students have been showcased, as it were, on our air. And then finally, one of our proudest moments or proudest shows is Immense Possibilities with Jeff Golden. And he actually shoots it in this studio here on at Southern Oregon University. But it's co-produced with us, and we air it 3 times a week. And it's what we would consider our premier public affairs program. And if you've seen it, you know that he covers many different angles, whether it be programs for children, programs for the poor, programs for, you know, the name kind of says it all, Immense Possibilities. He talks to people about what's the immense possibility of the program that they have to help people out.
Okay, when the public is interested in what you're doing at SOPTV, how do they go about finding out what's going on there, supporting the station, things like that?
Well, there's a number of ways. The best way to stay in touch with what's on public television is to become a member. And when you're a member, you get our program guide once a month. And our program guide not only has the listings for our main channel, but we also, a lot of people don't know this, but we actually have 3 channels. We have our main channel, which we've been pretty much discussing here, but we also have the World Channel, which is a documentary and public affairs channel that airs on 8.2. And we also have the Create Channel, which is our do-it-yourself channel and travel channel and so forth. So our program guide is the main way, but the listings, when you go to a listing service or you looked at in the newspaper, or you go to, let's say, the Tribune listing service or the TV Guide listing service on your iPad or whatever, that's how you find out what's on our air.
Okay, we're going to take a look at Student Showcase.
I know your insides are feeling so hollow. And it's a hard pill for you to swallow. But if I fall for you, I'll never recover.
I think the hardest part about an a cappella group is the fact that we don't have any instruments to help us tone.
So you have to really listen to the other people around you.
Take me all the way. Dance night away. I know we're only halfway there, but you take me all the way. You take me all the way.
I started singing when I was about 3 years old.
I started singing in middle school, and then I joined some more advanced choir.
We're planning on going to a competition in Albany in March. It's called Acapella in Albany.
A few months ago, we were asked to open for the Bobs, an international a cappella group.
Whoa, 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 whoa.
Okay, and how did you find out about Student Showcase?
Well, this particular student showcase is called Verbal Absurdities. And we have a producer that we work with. He's an independent producer, but we work with him on the Student Showcase project, and he does anywhere from 4 to 14 of these a year. And this one was discovered by Ralph Bowman, who is our producer, and he put it together. First of all, Ralph works with the schools and asks for recommendations. Who are the talented students out there? Who's rising to the top? And more importantly, who's rising to the top not necessarily in sports? Student Showcase tries to stay away from sports. Not that there's anything wrong with sports, but the sports people seem to get a lot of credit in the newspapers, on the clips, on the sports shows, and at the end of the news, the commercial stations have, and so forth. We're looking for some of the more unique students that have their own talents. So here's this Verbal Absurdities group, who is an a cappella group, that more or less plays underneath the radar, but they go to events and they do school shows and so forth, and they're very talented, as we just saw, but on the other hand, nobody has really heard about them other than if they've played at their school or something. But we've had diversity on Student Showcase. We've had the state champion welder I mean, who knew that there was even a contest to be a
Right.
state champion welder? We've had people who are into horses and are professional riders in high school. We've had ceramicists, we've had set designers, we've had school groups that, like the jazz ensemble at North Medford High School. So we try to cover the gamut of talented students, as it were, that you know, have exceptional talent, and Ralph Bowman has a way of digging these things out and presenting them. And I might also add that if anybody out there is interested in sponsoring one of these students, we can talk to you about it. There's a nominal fee for the production costs, but as I said, we were well over 60 of these on the air over the last 7 years, so we would appreciate anybody that's interested in sponsoring one to come forward.
Okay, so it sounds like you're really supporting the interests that are in the community. Whatever the community's interests are, you try to support that.
Yeah, that's true. And, you know, we could always do more with more resources, and resources often translate into we need more money, because television is not an inexpensive medium. It costs money when we need to crew, when we need to edit, and just the equipment alone needs to be kept up and replaced. As we talked earlier before the show, the technology is moving so quickly that we need to keep up with that too, because to get the program on the air, you really need state-of-the-art equipment to do that. And so, but yeah, we try to do as much as we can for the community with the resources we have, and we think that the 3 franchises I just mentioned, whether it's public affairs with immense possibilities that covers a whole gamut of public services, whether it's student showcases that attracts and has a vested interest in our students throughout the 6-county area. And I might add, we've taken students from all the 6 counties that we serve, not just Jackson, not just Josephine, but also Curry and Lake, and even into California where we serve Siskiyou County. But then also our 3rd franchise, as I mentioned, Southern Oregon Town Hall, which focuses in on issues that are of an acute nature that we really need to address with some kind of a panel discussion. So yeah, we think with those 3, we have it pretty well covered. Obviously, we could always do more.
I know it has to be a little difficult with the demographic change that is happening real quickly in this area. I know there's an influx of people from different places and stuff. How do you manage to keep up with that?
It's not easy. It's not easy, and it's always not easy to kind of read what the demographic changes are. I mean, we have a fairly big influx of retirees into this area, especially Josephine County, and indeed, public television is often seen as a station or as a service for the 55 and older, and there's a lot of programs on our broadcast that serve that need, and so more and more we're seeing more and more members and viewers come in from that demographic. But that being said, we also have more diversity in terms of the whether it's African Americans or the Latinos or many different kinds of diverse elements that we have to serve, and we try to do that too. And in fact, you know, anytime we can get programs that deal with issues around those minorities, we try to make sure that they're on our air. And that gets back to the original mandate of public television, which is how do you get stuff on public television that you just don't see anyplace else, that doesn't have a commercial value necessarily, but does have value in terms of widening the discourse about certain issues.
Okay, I know that in this county, I know there's a strong veteran community here.
Absolutely.
I was impressed that you were doing some shows specifically for veterans at certain times. Are there other times that you look at shows specifically for certain populations?
Oh, absolutely. And in fact, I just got a DVD in the mail, and I'm going to screen it. But this is a good example. It deals with what do kids who are adopted do after they reach the age of majority and they're on their own to find their birth parents. Now, that's a pretty big issue because there's a lot of adopted kids. And this, to your point, this has been on my mind for a while because, first of all, I have an adopted child, and I'm anticipating those days when he's going to want to find out about his birth parents, but I hear it from other parents all the time that I meet who have adopted kids, that this is, and when you think about it, this is an issue that's under the radar, but there are so many adopted kids out there that this is actually a pretty major issue that the parents have to face. So to your point, you know, this was on my mind, and then this DVD comes across my desk that says this program's going to be served up to the system May 1st, but it's an optional program, so here's the key. I can run it or I can't run it. But because I've already sort of tuned into this as an issue, not just because I have an adopted child, but because I've talked to so many parents that do. So that's what I do, is I try to, you know, whether it's by intuition or by reading or looking at statistics, and I find out what are the issues out there, then when something comes up that I can react to, like this program, and I'm going to make the decision, assuming that I like the program. I still have to look at it. But you know, you make the decision to serve that community, as it were. And the same is true with veterans. I've long known that this is one of the biggest, if not the biggest, veteran community in Oregon. And it just makes common sense. I asked Jeff Golden to do a few immense possibilities on that, and he has, and we look forward to doing more with the veterans community. And in fact, I think one of our volunteer coordinators actually has something on the radar right now where we can have an event that is going to deal with veterans.
So it's wonderful that you can entertain and educate at the same time. So.
Well, that's absolutely true, Andy. And in fact, not just this station, but the station before that I worked at, and going back to KQED where I worked in San Francisco, they all had a byline that said something to the tune of educate, enlighten, and entertain, or inspire, enlighten, and entertain. And that's absolutely right. We try to get programs that meet all three of those criteria in one show, or two of those criteria. And sometimes if it's a really important issue, at least get it one of those issues covered, whether it's inspiration or enlightenment or entertainment.
Okay, so on a more personal note, what inspired you to stick with PBS?
Well, yeah, for all of the reasons we sort of just talked about, I enjoy serving the community. I enjoy the people I work with. The public television community is a unique culture, and I also enjoy watching it. I mean, I'm just a fan of public television myself. And it might be a front line on a Tuesday night where they finally get to an issue that needed to be addressed and finally got addressed, whether it be an inspiring symphony live from Lincoln Center, or whether it's a local public affairs program that's finally addressing a show or an issue that that has been festering in the community that needed to be discussed.
Okay, so you're gonna be with us for a while into the future, I take it.
Well, I hope to. I actually came to Southern Oregon with the intention of staying here and raising my child, and then also retiring here eventually. As you brought out moments ago, I have moved all over the country, whether it's New Hampshire or California or Northern California and now Oregon. And frankly, moving around is sort of behind me, and I'd like to stay here as long as the public television station will have me.
Okay, we've got a few minutes left. Is there anything that you'd like to say to the audience about SOPTV and how it works and what you feel about it?
Well, you know, you've probably seen me on pledge drives, and and maybe it's become like a broken record, but I'll just say it again here, that we can't do public television without the support of our viewers. We do know through surveys that every 10 viewers, only one of them supports public television. So that means that 9 viewers are sort of using us for free. And that's okay, because the original mandate of public television was to provide free public television to anybody. That's one of the reasons we're still transmitting. We're not a cable station, we're transmitting. So anybody that has a television can watch public television. But to the point, we sure could use 2 out of 10 or 3 out of 10 people supporting public television, especially if you're using our service. We would appreciate it. But it's an interesting dynamic, because you're asking people to voluntarily pay for something that they're getting for free. Now, how many services can you talk about that? You go to a dry cleaner, he doesn't dry clean your clothes for free and then says, hey, can you contribute a buck? It doesn't work that way. But public television is a unique partnership in that way with the viewer, in that we would hope that you would find our service valuable enough to support, especially if you're using it. And I want to speak specifically to people who have kids. Unfortunately, most of our viewers of children's programming who put their kids in front of our programming day after day, and I hear about it all the time, and we have statistics and so forth to prove this, that so many people use our children's service, which is essentially on from 6 in the morning till 6 at night, watching Sesame Street and Cyber Chase and Electric Company and all these great children's programming, which all have an academic and a educational element. And I'll talk about that in a minute if you want. But the point is all these people are watching that kids program, and very few of them support it. And here we are, providing this for your children. So I would just ask people to look deep and say, well, if I'm using this service, maybe I should support it. And so that's where I'd like to leave the audience in terms of what they think about public television.
Okay, we got about 2 minutes left. I'd like to know how public television actually moves forward with the different people, like from the older people down to the younger people. How do you know when to do that? Who's watching and when to show those type of shows?
Well, first of all, as I mentioned earlier, we program our station through the services of Oregon Public Broadcasting. And unlike us, who don't have a lot of money to spend on this kind of thing, they have a lot of research that they get not only monthly, weekly, but even overnight. It's called the Nielsen Overnights. And so they have a pretty good bead on what people's viewing habits are. So that would indicate that you really don't want to show a lot of shows for the 55 and older too late in the evening, because, and I'll count myself in this category, we kind of like to go to bed earlier than we did when we were young. On the other hand, some of the, like here's a good example, we program Austin City Limits at 11 o'clock at night. That show's been on the air almost 40 years, but it has all the great acts that young people enjoy and have grown up with and so forth. And so, we know that there's an audience out there at 11 o'clock at night that is still awake and ready to watch a good old music show. So, so we kind of defer to OPB on that, but it's not rocket science either. You sort of know who's watching what when, and then we also try to avoid certain things, like on Super Bowl Sunday, we're obviously going to air something that is not going to compete with that.
Okay, well, thank you for being here with me today, Brad.
Oh, it's a pleasure.
Appreciate the time.
I appreciate it. I hope to come back.